So speaking of dumpster fires, let's chat about those house rules. The house rules. We're going to head back into that little topic. I suggested this topic because we just did an episode recently about house rules, and then it hit Reddit first, and then Pleasant Kenobi picked up on it, of that absolutely ridiculous list of house rules from a particular shop in Michigan. So it kind of revived the discussion, and it made me think like, oh, okay, let's go back to house rules, and because I have some thoughts about those house rules from the Michigan shop, and then also some of Pleasant Kenobi's comments. And then also you did a thing on Reddit too. So let's get into it.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to tap one black and play Thought Seize on you there, so you don't have that thought anymore.
Okay. So which thought am I losing?
Gotta show me your hand first.
Okay. I don't know how to play Thoughtseize without cards in my hand. I have none. I'm just an empty brain. That's basically it.
Well, fair, I don't actually own that card. It's too expensive. I love how we just started and we're already off topic.
Oh yeah, I know. So house rules. So okay, so to take it back to the house rules. So first off, the Michigan ban list house rules thing is hilarious, and you really should check out the video of Pleasant Kenobi because he breaks it down. He just basically goes over the list and makes fun of it the entire time. It's a good watch. But it's interesting because at the beginning of it, he makes a comment, which is what spurred me to want to talk about this again. He made a comment about how he actually doesn't like house rules. He thinks they're bad. Give or take. Like I'm simplifying. He gets a little bit more nuanced, but he's essentially saying that house rules are not great because the game is already perfect. Not perfect, but it's already good. It's already really good. And any house rule is just making it worse because the people making the house rules aren't professional designers like the designers of Magic.
I was gonna say, I think the point on this one is that store went overkill. Right.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they're not in a position to say, okay, well, we're just going to ban these 172 cards and restrict these other ones and change the text on these ones. How do you keep up?
Yeah.
I get, like, your kitchen table pod, right? Where you might ban a card here or ban a card there, similar to, like, what the MTG Goldfish team does, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where they play a bunch of games together and they're like, hey, for the sake of the game, let's take out these cards that are way too good.
Yeah.
Right. And let's play a game where I have to step up and do more rather than Cyclonic Rift everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like that, there's a big difference there, right? Mm-hmm. Where you have the dynamic of like, hey, we like to play your games. We're gonna maybe adjust the rules here or there a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, from what I saw on Reddit, from my people replying to my post, most of it is around mulligans.
Yeah, and for the listeners, basically what Dinko did was he went on to MTG, the MTG subreddit, not MTG. He went on MTG, RMTG, and put the question, what house rules have you seen while playing? And it actually got a pretty amazing response. It got 283 comments and...
Yeah, there's some sitting there I still haven't read yet because they're still coming in.
Oh yeah, like it's like there's a ton, but and really, yeah, you're right. Most of them are mulligans. Most of them are free mulligans, or I found it interesting. Some of them were like, instead of doing mulligans, they do draw 7, scry 3 kind of thing at the beginning of the game. I was interested to see that the most of them were just mulligans. Like I did see there was one poison though. There one poison did come in. I saw that.
There technically was 2, but the guy deleted his comment quick.
Oh, okay.
So like I could still read it in my notifications.
Oh.
I did ask that person to clarify about the poison, and just to talk about that while it's on my mind, they talked about how they upped it to 15, not 20. They didn't double it like the life. It's at 15. And I asked them just to like, how does that affect the games and all that? I mentioned that like on a 1v1, not noticeable. But in a like multiplayer pod, it seems to have calmed it a bit, right? It's still good, but it's not overkill. And it's interesting to get that, like, how much are they playing it?
Yeah.
Right? Because at least it's not a, Blight Steel Colossus, I win.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the interesting thing to me is, because I remember I used to be it should be 20. Because in my mind, it at the time it made sense. You're doubling the life, so double the poison counters. Like what But another reason was because when I first got into Commander, and I got my playgroup into Commander, one of my friends immediately went to Infect. Like he just beelined it right to Infect, and he dominated our tables for weeks. And we just couldn't get around him because we were new and, new to the format and still learning and trying to figure everything out. And so I got very firm in my belief of yes, it should be 20. It sucks that it's 10. But then he quit because he got bored. Like he quit playing Infect because he just got bored. It was getting very samey. And so he moved on to other things. And you know what? I've run into Infect maybe 2 or 3 times since then, and it hasn't been as bad because I've gotten better as a player. I think I have a feeling that the people, I could be wrong. I have a feeling that the people who want it to be a 20 are people who run into Infect a lot.
Yeah, I mean that just the basic logic of double life, double that, right? And that's where my philosophy was on it the longest time. It's like, why would you give me more life resources, but yet still make it so that I only need 10 counters?
Yeah.
It's counterintuitive in that regard, but to the same point, Infect isn't as quick of a kill as a lot of the other things out there.
Oh yeah.
Which is why people don't go in too hard. And even with us having this whole Phyrexia coming back part and getting toxic and all that, it's a strategy in like other constructed formats. Mm-hmm. You can build your Infect deck or Poison deck or whatever you're doing it, right? Mm-hmm. But it hasn't really gone too hard. I think about how they did it where it's, toxic 1. Doesn't matter how much damage you did, it's 1 poison counter, right? Mm-hmm. They watered it down a little bit so it's not too crazy. Because imagine if it wasn't. Imagine if it was just, it has Infect and you're swinging it with a, 4/4 Phyrexian. It's like, oh, hey, that's going to kill me quick.
Oh, yeah.
So I think they did a better job of supporting it more, but not overkilling it.
Yeah. It was really interesting to me to see that Infect wasn't as big of an issue. And I was also surprised to see that there were a lot of limit to $1 per card or £1, I think, or €1 per card, I think was the comment. Or like limit the deck to $2,000 worth of land was one comment.
Yeah, that one I was like caught a little bit off guard. I'm like, 2,000 to limit? Like, what kind of money bags are you rolling with here at the table?
Yes, apparently for this one it was Carl is probably rolling in with some OG duels. But
they mentioned it's like a lot of people who've been playing a really long time. They have a lot of those old duels, and those are just expensive, right? They play their cards. Why wouldn't you if you have them? But I think that's interesting because like I don't have a deck that's worth more than that, let alone just the mana base.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the thing that I find interesting. Like a lot of the decks I have that are like half built, they're built where the majority of the deck is built. The only part that I'm slowly putting together is the mana base, because it's the mana base that's 80% of the cost of the deck. But yeah, it's this is interesting. Some of these, like especially with the cost around it, and I find it interesting because you've got two. Like if you compare the two, you got the $1 per card limit. We'll just say that because we'll use Eagle money for now.
Freedom dollars.
freedom dollars. And so you got $1 per card compared to $2,000 deck limit. I think those are two fundamentally different limits because one is almost like a Pauper variant. Like,
oh yeah,
it's I think, or more like Penny Dreadful, I think would be a good example, because you're not only keeping the cost down, but you're also saying you're effectively saying that at least cards within the last 10 years or so that are good can't be in this house format. Where on the other hand, you have this $2,000 thing saying you can't be Mr. Moneybags rolling up in here, and we don't allow proxies, kind of thing. I find that interesting.
There's quite a few rares and good cards that fall in the 50-cent bin, though. Mm-hmm. Like a lot other than like the all stars in a set, most things just lose value so hard.
Oh yeah. They drop pretty quick.
It's interesting because I don't know if I'd call that a house rule as much as a build restriction on like a type of game you're doing, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because you're saying, hey, when you build your deck, it's not how we play the deck, it's how we build the deck.
yeah.
We're going to put this restriction because there was another one on there that commented, and I looked up the format. They called it like mini commander, I think is what they called it, but really it's tiny leader.
Oh, okay.
The only difference is they have more life from their comment. Like I think they start at 30 instead of 20. And
okay.
like it's just pretty much, nothing could be higher than 3 CMC, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's restrictions on the color pie usage,
Mm-hmm.
where like in Tiny Leader the only extra restriction is like if you're using a partner commander, for one, their total CMC together has to be I think 4 or less,
Mm-hmm.
and then also you can't have all 5 colors when you do it.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. I think it'd be fun to build a Tiny Leader deck at some point and try that out. Just because that's kind of like almost, it's not Pauper Commander because that's the thing, but it's really, it's the teeny weeny. We're gonna go out here with all these really cheap things, right?
Yeah, I'm just looking up Tiny Leader now because Tiny Leader has always kind of been the meme format that people like to bring up because it was kind of like Oathbreaker in a sense where it came out, people were like, hey, we should do this, and then it just kind of fizzled and went away. And whereas like Oathbreaker has kind of stuck around a little bit, it's even been recognized by Wizards. I think, like, let's all be honest. I think Brawl would have gone the same way as Tiny Leaders if Wizards hadn't basically said, "No, you're playing this," like making it a format in Arena and like doing all that stuff.
Well, speaking of that though, like I was curious about Brawl because Brawl came up while I wasn't playing, right? So I come back and it's like, what's Pioneer? What's Brawl? What the crap is this, right? And it's like, you're joking that it has this standard rotation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who's going to play that? Like, you can't get people to play standard.
Yeah.
When you talk about, like, a cost restriction on the deck, too, like, I get the no card over $1 thing. It's like some channels, Commander Quarters love doing budget builds where they do that restriction, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, like, that overall, it's just to keep the cost of the deck down, which is great because you can get a $5 Commander deck, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But I think the overall cost restriction, which they do also a lot of those builds, it's like, hey, here's a $50 deck that does decent, and here's the upgrades if you want to like spend 100.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? I think that's an interesting way to do it, other than the fact that it's cost at time of build, right? Your deck might not be still only $100 by the time you're playing it 6 months later.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Depending on like how the market moves and all that. And that's the issues with those kinds of formats, but I do think those kinds of challenges are fun, especially if you have a group of people who are trying to not just, come in there with their CEDH deck and say, okay, well, I win, right?
Yeah.
Like, give it a little challenge. Like, do it on a budget. Like, if you want that big haymaker, okay, well, you have less budget to work with the other cards.
Yeah, yeah. Part of the reason why I wanted to talk about this is when Pleasant Kenobi mentioned the beginning, because when he mentioned the beginning that he didn't like house rules and everything, he wasn't specifically talking about the ban list of Michigan. Like, he was saying in general, and that made me realize that he's. It reminded me, I should say, that he's a competitive player. Like, he was a competitive player. He likes to play Legacy, and he's played competitively in the past, so he has that mindset. I should say, it seems like he has that mindset. And which basically does lend itself to, no, we play the game the way it's meant to be played. Like, we play the game by the rules set out by whatever format we're doing. We're not messing around with this stuff. It's just, this is how you play. The thing is that, and this is something that Wizards and Mark Rosewater and all this like try to say so much, that a majority of Magic players don't play like that. Like, a majority of Magic players don't even know who Mark Rosewater is. They don't, like, they couldn't tell you what the current release set is if you ask them, and they've been playing for 30 years, or not. You get
that,
what I mean?
And like, I can't tell you what's in rotation right now for standard. I can't, right?
Yeah, I think it's
I can
Dominar
tell you
United
like
Forward.
Right, but I can tell you a few of the sets.
Mm-hmm.
But like, it's like, how far back are we going here? And it's like, Unfinity came out over a year ago now. It's like,
oh yeah.
Again, we're good at getting off topic. Yeah, so like Mulligan rules, right? And I think it's worth talking about a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few where they talk about, okay, well, free mulligans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which, tabletop, fine, right?
Yeah.
Like if that's how your group rolls, and that's how I typically am in casual too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I'd rather play a good game rather than the person just be like, oh yeah, by the way, I mulliganed down to one card and I never drew a land,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's an interesting one in there where they mentioned that they do 2 free mulligans, and then if you're still not happy, you have to swap your deck.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
That's
which
interesting.
like was apparently to stop somebody who liked to, mulligan until they got their perfect hand, kind of a
Yeah.
thing, right?
Yeah.
Which a lot of them, like, it's like not a problem because they trust their friends and their friends aren't playing like that. But there are those kinds of players out there who it's not cheating, but it's in the gray territory of
Yeah.
like disrespectful play.
Yeah. Which and it's funny you mentioned that, because I think another one that falls into that, somebody was talking about the take backsies, which
Mm-hmm.
which I find interesting, because that's definitely one that I think falls into that similar gray area that can be abused, because you'll get a situation where somebody makes a mistake there, or they misread a card or something, and they go to do something, or they miss a trigger or whatever, and the table lets them take it back, and then something else happens a little bit later with another player, and the table doesn't let them take it back, and it's like, well, wait, you get these weird dynamics that sometimes can happen. I think it's actually, in some scenarios, a good idea to really set up boundaries around that kind of stuff. Like the way I usually play it is, I usually play it where, as long as somebody isn't abusing it, the take backsies are fine. It's when somebody starts to abuse it is when it's like, okay.
And yeah, I think it really depends on what you're trying to take back, right? Because
Yeah.
a lot of people have mentioned that too, where if there's no new information gained, right?
Yeah.
Like you're doing your combo, you're trying to get off, and then someone counters, you can't take back, right?
Yeah.
But it's more so, I think, to some of our games where it's like,
Mhm.
wait a minute, that doesn't do what I think it does, or I
Yeah.
missed this trigger over
Yeah.
here. And depending on how far we are, right, it may matter, it may not. If it's not game breaking, we usually are good at just saying whatever, it's my fault.
Yeah, exactly.
If it mattered, we're like, okay, well, let's take that into account, right?
Yeah.
And that's if we notice.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is a whole
yeah.
different thing.
Yeah. That's a, yeah. Noticing is not always the case.
Yeah, until it's like, the next morning, I'm like, Nate, I'm sorry, you should have won that.
Hey, that's
Which did
only
happen.
Yeah, but it only happened once, and that's totally fine. And I am absolutely fine with that. I think it's we had fun during the game, which was all that mattered.
Yeah, and it was a good game. It really was. I was doing so bad, and then I hardly pulled it through. And I wouldn't have if I fully read the card.
Yeah.
But I assumed it was like the other 2 in my deck, which, with Commander, your cards may say different things.
Oh yeah.
And it happens. That, we're only human, right? We're not this, Modo doing it all for you. Yeah, people talk about like with those take backsies, like the limit to like 3 a game, which I think is interesting. Like you get the token for it, like they'll do that. And if you're doing more casual and you're trying to teach people how to play, I think that's good, right?
Yeah.
Where you can have that moment you're like, okay, personally, I think it should be up to the council. And that's pulling in some conspiracy stuff here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, if it's a 1v1, if your opponent's okay with it, they're okay with it. If not, that's on you. You learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
If it's like a pod, if more people are okay with it than not, I think it should be up to discretion, right? Because like, to the same point, if I tap a bunch of mana to play something and then I didn't read it all the way, or I didn't have the right mana for it, I should be allowed to untap.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is pretty easy. At least it's pretty easy for me to tell in certain situations where like you can tell when someone's trying to get away with something. You know what I mean? And I don't necessarily mean they're trying to cheat or they're trying to, or trying to get an upper hand. They made a mistake. They realize they've made a mistake that's kind of really shouldn't be taken back. But they're just like, oh, come on, guys. It's fair. Same thing with the mulligan, where it's like they're trying to get that perfect hand and they're abusing the infinite mulligan rule to get there. And it's like, okay, you're on your 19th mulligan. Let's go here. Come on. Like,
Right. Well, and I think an interesting way to think about it too, because like, to your point, if you've played with these people before, you can kind of tell who those people are.
Yeah.
And like, it's unfortunate that there's people who play this game that are borderline sociopaths.
Mm-hmm.
And it just happens. That's,
Yeah.
what happens in the real world.
Yep.
But I think personally, you should only be able to add take back to the stack at split second speed.
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
if you did your whole stack and it's resolved, and then you're trying to do something else and you want to take back something previous, I don't think it should be allowed.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's split second, and again, so in your priority, right? Like, you haven't passed priority yet.
Yeah, yeah. I think the only exception to that, I think, in my mind, that is acceptable, and again, this is if everybody's cool with it, if you do something and you haven't realized you've made a mistake, and somebody at the table goes, "Whoa, wait! You do realize that doing that, this is going to happen, right?"
Yes, I agree, and that's again like the will of the council speaking up, saying like, "Hey, let's think about this for a second."
Yeah, exactly. Because a lot of times, and this is something that I have to deal with a lot, because I'm not the best at keeping track of more than 5 things at a time. And a lot of times in a Commander game, there is like 27 things happening on the board, or at least when you're about to cast something, 27 things might happen. And sometimes I will forget that, if I cast this creature that's a 1/1, well, that creature over there that gives everything -1/-1 is essentially just going to straight up kill it. So,
right,
like,
yeah, like the Elsh Norns, the Chalice of the Voids on the field that you forgot existed.
Exactly. I will say one thing that surprised me, I didn't see, and let me know if you saw different, but I fully expected, when you told me you did this, and I was looking at the things, I was waiting for someone to say no Universes Beyond, and I didn't see a 1. That surprised me.
I think I didn't see it either. Again, I haven't been in there since we started talking, but it's interesting because at least with the Universes Beyond, they're starting to incorporate those extra cards where you can get them. Like, we've yet to see the Walking Dead show back up, but it's not so much as a pay to win as it used to be. Even though it's still kind of, Magic is pay to win, right?
Well, yeah, but I think I will say, I think there would have been, if this question was asked on Magic TCG, the main subreddit, and not just the RMTG, which is where you asked it, because RMTG seems to be more casual than the Magic TCG subreddit. That's considered the main subreddit because it's the biggest. And I do think I would be shocked if you didn't get at least 1, but I'm glad to see that I didn't, because I think it's here to stay. Like, it's happening.
I did have one comment that was about like no land destruction, and it's like, I think that's that same mentality of like no Universes Beyond, right?
Yeah,
where you're telling someone, no, you're not allowed to use these kinds of cards because I don't like them.
Yeah,
and I mean, if your friends agree to it, that's fine, right? If it's a shop saying that, I'd have a problem. And again, it's similar to the person playing the infect deck, right? And stacks and control and MLD, massive land destruction. Like, it's fine, but if that's all you ever run, don't be upset when people don't play with you.
Exactly. And I think that's the key. Like, I think a lot of these things, just a little taste here and there is great, or fine. And if you got to deal with it one game, you deal with it one game. But it's whenever you're bringing it to the table every day, and it's your only deck, and it's all you're running. I also recognize that saying that can sound, for lack of a better term, elitist, because some people can only afford to build one deck. But
the decks that are problems cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
So
fair.
Like, you could have built a couple okay decks.
Yeah, exactly. That is
I mean,
that
even
is true.
then, like, there's a deck I want to build that I've been looking at here that it's a Xur deck, and people hate Xur. It's kill on sight, but it's like, I'm not going to play it to like combo off win. I want to do weird things.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The whole idea of that deck is like, I might draw half a combo that's weird, and I'll search for the other half with him. But Now there's some cards I probably shouldn't put in there just because it's like instant win.
Yeah.
Similar to like Oblivion Ring on a Baron Glory, right? And then just board wipe Oblivion Ring goes. I have only a Baron Glory. Guess what? But things like that, like toning it down. And I have a stack of cards I just pulled from my collection that I could probably just build a very crappy, mid-range deck with it, just fine, and it'll be fun, right? I mean, that's what I did with my freaking Sigarda deck. I might have I had to order a few things for it, but like overall, it's like, hey, this is not optimal. But that's again, that's a preference. That's the way we play things, and to your detriment, I really do want to build a land destruction commander deck. Right?
It's fine. Bring it. I will happily have my land destroyed.
I know you're okay with it, right?
Yeah.
Because like, it's not something I'd pull out every game. And again, it's a 1v1. Like it's okay. Like people get really upset when it's a pod situation. That's 3 people, you're destroying their stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I will say though, I think I found my favorite rule though. Okay. And I found it on this thing. He said that they said that they have a house rule. Any proxy must be announced in a Rule 0 convo, and it must be a poorly drawn doodle of the OG card. That is my new house rule. That is going in for my proxies.
To be fair,
right there.
I did ask them for some clarification on that one.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. So with that, like I asked, like if it it's a really nicely printed proxy, is that okay too? And like, yeah, that's the problem. Was they'd have a guy who'd put a card in the sleeve backwards, write on a little slip of paper what the name of it was and its cost, just slide it in there, and not have anything else. And then like he would get the card wrong because he's doing it from memory.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
So it's like it needs to actually look like the card and be like the card where you can look at it and go, oh, hey, that's a Soul Ring.
Yeah.
Which if you're proxying Soul Ring, what are you doing?
Yeah, seriously. Like
it go buy any commander deck.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, well, and and even if not, like it's still a couple of it's still a couple bucks a pop, but it's a heck of a lot cheaper than it used to be. Like I remember before I got into Commander, but this was when Commander was back when it was still Elder Dragon Highlander, and it was just getting popular, and it was getting popular to the point where Soul Ring was expensive because Wizards hadn't started printing Commander decks yet. So they hadn't reprinted it all that much. So it was like a $20 card. And I remember my first Soul Ring, I bought $20. It was $20 for that sucker. And now you can get a brand new one for a couple of bucks. So yeah, just,
One last thing I'd like to point out about the Mulligan stuff.
Oh, sure.
Like there's some interesting variations. A lot of them were very common in theme. And I kind of landed on what I think is like a decent way to do it.
Okay.
Because like in general, it's you draw more than the 7, right? Typically 10. There was one guy who was the first one to comment about it, does 12. And then you either shuffle back or you put on bottom the difference, get you to 7. And then there's no more mulligans, right? Some cases they'll still allow them. Rarely that's a problem, but I think it's interesting because it's that whole idea of, okay, I'm gonna draw 10 cards. What 3 in here can I do without? You just put it on bottom. You're not reshuffling, right? And like that was something I asked some people about, like what's the difference between having to shuffle or putting them on the bottom? But yeah, like you have a chance to draw them again, but like streamlining mulligans is to cut down on shuffles.
Oh yeah.
So like the one guy calls it Bob 10. I don't know why. But I think it's an interesting way to do it, and I think we should try it sometime. And then the other ones that happen and come up too are people talking about like, oh well, if you have more than like so many players, like one gets to scry and all that other stuff. People are talking about like I think the interesting one I want to try at some point too is if you have more than 4 players, doing kind of like a zone of influence, right?
Yeah. I saw that comment on that. Yeah,
where like you can only interact with people on your right or left, and if you do something that's a board wipe, it only affects them, right? And your infinite combo only affects them. So like at the start of your turn, like it is set that is your sphere of influence. If you kill both of them, you can't do anything to the people beyond them because they're still out of your sphere for that turn.
Okay, for that turn, but then after the turn rotates, then they become it. Okay, that's interesting.
Right. Yeah. And then there's a different one that was talking about like a 5-point like star thing where you're affecting the people across from you, and once they're dead, you win. Like you don't have to kill everybody. So like there's different styles of play, right? And I don't consider that home rule as much as just cool variations. Right?
Yeah. Well, I think that goes back that ties it way back to what we were saying, and particularly what I was saying about the what brought this all up in the episode or the thing of the video of Pleasant Kenobis is that that's playing the way the game was intended to be played from the mothership is fine. That's great. Obviously, that's what brought many of us to the table. But sometimes you want to change it up. And sometimes you want to try something different. And I think stuff like Zone of Influence, it's actually part of the reason why I really like going to MagicCons, because they offer new and interesting ways to play the game through their ticketed events, which I love doing. And sometimes my LGS will throw something special out there every now and again, but it happens maybe once every couple of months, where with MagicCons, I can go and do like 3 or 4 special events that I'm not going to get to do anywhere else that do things like Zone of Influence. Like I played a Grand Melee one time then there was a Zone of Influence thing involved on that. And, just all these different ways to play. And if you can do that, if you can come up with some of these and try them at home and try and see if you like them. And if you like it, maybe it's something that you want to throw into your regular play every now and again. Just a thought.
I think the only advice I would give people in general is if you have house rules, just think about how you would play if you are going to go play against someone new or go to your LGS, right? In general, you want to still play by the rules. Mulligans, I think, are okay to adjust as long as you still know how to properly mulligan.
Yeah.
But there's some people who talked about like they do fast games where they draw 2 cards. It doesn't give the draw 2 effects don't trigger from it. Right. But they draw 2 and you could play 2 lands a turn. Right. So they were playing speed Magic. Yeah. And like that, again, as long as you acknowledge that that's not normal and you don't teach people that's how Magic's played.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because like there was a conversation I had with someone on there where like the guy who taught them and taught a bunch of people how to play had some weird house rules that were just off, right?
Yeah.
Fundamentally, the rest of Magic, he taught them correct. It's just that stuff wasn't. But then, like, he was okay not doing it and stuff like that. But like, know where that boundary is and say, okay, well, if I go and play with anyone else, do I have to explain it? It's like Uno, right? Like everyone has house rules for Uno, and no one's ever actually read the manual.
Yeah, that's that's like, oh god, it's like the craziest game of telephone.
No, it is, and like, I mean, again, it's like Monopoly too. Like I've sat and read the rules once, and it's like we've been playing this wrong the entire time.
Oh yeah, I think that's one of the best examples because isn't there a rule in Monopoly, and I could be wrong, but in the actual rules of Monopoly, it says that when you land on a space, I could be wrong, but when you land on the thing, and if you decide not to buy it, then it goes up for auction. And anybody else can buy it.
That's something that my parents never did.
Yeah,
and like,
we never did
everyone
either.
Does the free parking pool where it's like all the taxes you paid goes to free parking and you get that. That's not a rule.
Yeah, that's not a rule.
Like, that's not real. Free parking just means you don't pay rent.
Yeah, that's hilarious to me because that auction rule makes the game go faster. And that about does it for today's discussion on Beyond the Deck Box, where we talk about all things Magic the Gathering. You can find us each week on the YouTube channel FDS MTG, or you can find us anywhere you get your podcasts. Just look for Beyond the Deck Box. You can find DM Dingo on Twitch, or you can find him on the FDS MTG Discord, link in the description. You can find me, FDS MTG, on YouTube, or at FDS_MTG on Threads, or on Mastodon, kind.social. Thank you so much for tuning in, and you all have a wonderful day.